Stephen tried his best, but the sum was too hard, and he felt confused. The little silk badge with the white rose on it was that pinned on the breast of his jacket began to flutter. He was no good at sums, but he tried his best so that York might not lose. Father Arnold's face looked very black, but he was not in a wax. He was laughing. Then Jack Lofton cracked his fingers, and Father Arnold looked at his copybook and said, "Right. Bravo, Lancaster. The Red Rose wins. Come on now, York. Forge ahead." Jack Lofton looked over from his side. The little silk badge with the red rose on it looked very rich, because he had a blue sailor top on. Stephen felt his own face red too, thinking of all the bets about who would get first place in the elements, Jack Lofton or he. Some weeks Jack Lofton got the card for the first, and some week he got the card for first. His white silk badge fluttered and fluttered as he worked at the next sum and heard Father Arnold's voice. Then all his eagerness passed away, and he felt his face quite cool. He thought his face must be white, because it felt so cool. He could not get out the answer for the first sum, but it did not matter. White roses and red roses. Those were beautiful colors to think of. And the cards for the first place and the third place were beautiful colors too. Pink and cream and lavender. Lavender and cream and pink roses were beautiful to think of. Perhaps a white rose might be like those colors, and he remembered the song about the white roses blossoms on the little green place. But you could not have a green rose. But perhaps somewhere in the world you could. The bell rang, and then the classes began to file out of the rooms and along the corridors toward the refectory. He sat looking at the two prints of the butter on his plate, but could not eat the damp bread. The tablecloth was damp and limp, but he drank off the hot weak tea which the clumsy scullion, geared with white apron, poured into his cup. He wondered whether the scullion's apron was damp too, or whether all white things were cold and damp. Nasty Roach and Saurin drank cocoa that their people sent them in tins. They said they could not drink the tea, that it was hogwash. Their fathers were magistrate, the fellow said. All the boys seemed to him very strange. They had all fathers and mothers and different clothes and voices. He longed to be at home and lay his head on his mother's lap, but he could not. And so he longed for the play and study and prayers to be over and to be in bed. He drank another cup of the hot tea, and Fleming said, "What's up? Have you a pain, or what's up with you?" "I don't know," Stephen said. "Sick in your bread basket," Fleming said. "Because your face looks white, it will go away." "Oh yes," Stephen said. But he was not sick there. He thought that he was sick in his heart if he could be sick in that place. Fleming was very decent to ask him. He wanted to cry. He leaned his elbows on a table and shut and opened the flaps on his ears. Then he heard the noise of the refectory every time he opened the flaps of his ears. It made a roar, like a train at night. And when he closed the flaps, the roar was shut off like a train going to a tunnel. That night at the Dalgate, the train had roared like that, and then, when it went into the tunnel, the roar stopped. He closed his eyes and the train went on, roaring and then stopping, roaring again, stopping. It was nice to hear it roar and stop and then roar out of the tunnel again and then stop. Then the higher line flow began to come down along the matting in the middle of the refectory. Paddy Rath and Jimmy Maggie and the Spaniard who was allowed to smoke cigars and the little Portuguese who wore a woolly cap. And then the lower line tables and the tables of the third line. And every single fellow had a different way of walking. He sat in a corner of the playroom pretending to watch a game of dominoes, and once or twice he was able to hear for an instant the little song of the gas. The prefect was the door with the same boys, and Simon Moonan was knocking his false sleeves. He was telling them something about Tulabek. Then he went away from the door, and Wells came over to Stephen and said, "Tell us, Dedalus, do you kiss your mother before you go to bed?" Stephen answered, "I do." Wells turned to the other fellow and said, "Oh, I say, here's a fellow says he kisses his mother every night before he goes to bed." The other fellows stopped their game and turned around, laughing. Stephen blushed under their eyes and said, "I do not." Wells said, "Oh, I say, here's a fellow says he doesn't kiss his mother before he goes to bed." They all laughed again. Stephen tried to laugh with them. He felt his whole body hot and confused in a moment. What was the right answer to the question? He had given two, and still Wells laughed. But Wells must know the right answer, for he was in a third of the grammar. He tried to think of the Wells mother, but he did not dare to raise his eyes to Wells' face. He did not like Wells' face. It was Wells who had shouldered him into the square ditch the day before because he would not swap his little snuff box for well-seasoned hacking chestnut. The Conqueror of 40. It was a mean thing to do. All the fellows said it was. And how cold and sleepy the water had been. And a fellow had once seen a big rat jump plop into the scum. The cold slime of the ditch covered his whole body. And when the bell rang for a study and the lines filled out of the playrooms, he felt the cold air of the corridor and a staircase inside his clothes. He still tried to think what was the right answer. Was it right to kiss his mother, or wrong to kiss his mother. What did that mean, to kiss? You put your face up like that, you say good night, and then his mother put her face down. That was to kiss. His mother put her lips on his cheek. Her lips were soft and they wet his cheek. And they made a tiny little nose. Kiss. Why did people do that with their two faces? Sitting in the study hall, he opened the lid of his desk and changed the number pasted up inside from 77 to 76. But the Christmas vacation was very far away. But one time it would come, because the earth moves round always. There was a picture of the earth on the first page of his geography, a big ball in the middle of the clouds. Fleming had a box of crayons, and one night during free study he had colored the earth green and the clouds maroon. That was like two brushes in Dante's press. The brush with the green velvet bag for Parnell, and the brush with the maroon velvet bag for Michael Davids. But he had not told Fleming to color them those colors. Fleming had done it himself. He opened the geography to study the lesson, but he could not learn the names of the places in America. Instead, they were all different places that had different names. They were all in different countries, and the countries were in a continents, and the continents were in a world, and the world was in a universe. He turned to the flyleaf of the geography and read what he had written there himself. His name and where he was. Stephen Dedalus, Class of the Elements, Clongowes College, Sallins, County Kildare, Ireland, Europe, the world, the universe. That was in his writing, and Fleming one night for a quote had written on the opposite page, Stephen Dedalus is my name. Ireland is my nation. Clongowes is my dwelling place. And he went my expectation. He read the words backwards, but then they were not poetry. Then he read the flyleaf from the bottom to the top till he came to his own name. That was he. And he read down the page again. What was after the universe? Nothing. But was there anything round the universe to show where it stopped before nothing place began? It could not be a wall. But there could be a thin line there are all around everything. It was very big to think about everything and everywhere. Only God could do that. He tried to think what a big thought that must be, but he could think only of the God. God was God's name, just as his name was Stephen. Jew was a French for God, and that was God's name too. And when anyone prayed to God and said the Jew, the God knew at once that it was a French person that was praying. But though there were different names for God in all the different languages in the world, and God understood what all the people who prayed said in different languages, still God remained always the same God, and God's real name was God. It made him very tired to think that way. It made him feel his head very big. He turned over the flyleaf and looked wearily at the green round earth in the middle of the maroon clouds. He wondered which was right, to be for green or for the maroon, because Dante has ripped the green velvet back of the brush that was for Parnell one day with her scissors, and had told him that Parnell was a bad man. He wondered if they were arguing at home about that. That was called politics. There were two sides in it. Dante was on one side, and his father and Mr. Casey were on the other side. But his mother and Uncle Charles were on no side. Every day there was something in a paper about it. It pained him that he did not know well what politics meant, and that he did not know where the universe ended. He felt small and weak. When would he be like the fellows in poetry and rhetoric? They had big voices and big boots, and they studied trigonometry. That was very far away. First came the vacation, and then the next term, and then a vacation again, and then again another term, and then again the vacation. It was like a train going in and out of the tunnels, and that was like that noise of the boys eating in a refectory when you opened and closed the flaps of the earth. Term, vacation, tunnel, out, noise, stop. How far away it was. It was better to go to bed to sleep. Only prayers in the chapel and then bed. He shivered and yawned. It would be lovely in bed after the sheets got a bit hot. First they were so cold to get into. He shivered to think how could they were first. But then they got hot, and then he could sleep. It was lovely to be tired. He yawned again. Night prayers and then bed. He shivered and wanted to yawn. It would be lovely in a few minutes. He felt a warm glow creeping up from the cold, shivering sheets. Warmer and warmer, till he felt warm all over. Ever so warm, and yet he shivered a little and still wanted to yawn. The bell rang for the night prayers, and he filed out of the study hall after the others, and down the staircase and along the corridors to the chapel. The corridors were darkly lit, and the chapel was darkly lit. Soon all would be dark and sleeping. There was a cold night air in the chapel, and marvelous were the colors the sea was at night. The sea was cold day and night, but it was colder at night. It was cold and dark under the sea wall beside his father's house. But the kettle would be on the hob to make a punch. prefect of the chapel prayed above his head, and his memory knew the responses. O Lord, open our lips, and our mouth shall announce thy praise. Incline unto our aid, O God. O Lord, make haste to help us. There was a cold night smell in the chapel, but it was a holy smell. It was not like a smell of the old peasants who knit at the back of the chapels at Sunday Mass. That was a smell of air and rain and turf and the corduroy, but they were very holy peasants. They breathed behind him on his neck and sighed as they prayed. They lived in Klein. A fellow said there were little cottages there, and he had seen a woman standing at the half door of the cottage with the child in her arms, as the cars had come past from Salins. It would be lovely to sleep for one night in that cottage before the fire of smoking turf, in a dark lit by a fire, in the warm dark, breathing the smell of the peasants, air and rain and turf and corduroy. But, oh, the road between the trees was dark. You would be lost in the dark. It made him afraid to think of how it was. He heard the voice of the prefect of the chapel saying the last prayer. He prayed it to against the dark outside under the trees. Visit, we beseech thee, O Lord, this habitation, and drive away from it all the snares of the enemy. May the holy angels dwell herein to preserve us in a peace, and may thy blessing be always upon us through Christ our Lord. Amen. His fingers trembled as he understood himself in a dormitory. He told his fingers to hurry up. He had to undress and then kneel and say his own prayers and be in bed before the gas was lowered, so that he might not go to hell when he died. He rolled his stocking off and put on his nightshirt quickly, and knelt, trembling, at his bedside and repeated his prayers quickly, fearing that the gas would go down. He felt his shoulders shaking as he murmured, God bless my father and my mother and spare them to me. God bless my little brothers and sisters and spare them to me. God bless Dante and Uncle Charles and spare them to me. He blessed himself and climbed quickly into bed, and tucking the end of the nightshirt under his feet, curled himself together under the cold white sheets, shaking and trembling. But he would not go to hell when he died, and the shaking would stop. A voice bade the boys in a dormitory good night. He peered out for an instant over the coverlet and saw the yellow curtains round and before his bed that shut him off on all sides. The light was lowered quietly. The prefect's shoes went away. Where? Down the staircase and along the corridors, or to his room at the end? He saw the dark. Was it true about the black dog that walked there at night with eyes as big cridge lamps? They said it was a ghost of the murderer. A long shiver of fur flowed over his body. He saw the dark entrance hall of the castle. Old servants in old dress were in an ironing room above the staircase. It was long ago. The old servants were quiet. There was a fire there, but the hall was still dark. A figure came up the staircase from the hall. He wore the white cloak of a marshal. His face was pale and strange. He held his hand pressed to his side. He looked out of the strange eyes at the old servants. They looked at him and saw their master's face and cloak and knew that he had received his death wound. But only the dark was where they looked, only dark, silent air. Their master had received his death wound on a battlefield of Prague far away over the sea. He saw standing on a field. His hand was pressed to his side. His face was pale and strange, and he wore a white cloak of a marshal. How cold and strange it was to think of that. All the dark was cold and strange. There were pale, strange faces there. Great eyes like carriage lamps. They were a ghost of murderers. The figures of marshals who received their death wound on a battlefield far away over the sea. What did they wish to say that their faces were so strange? Visit. We beseech thee, O Lord, this habitation and drive away from it all. Going home for holidays. That would be lovely, the fellows had told him. Getting up on the cars in the early wintry morning outside the door of a castle. The cars were rolling on the gravels. Cheers for the rector. Hurry, hurry, hurry. The cars drove past the chapel and all cabs were raised. They drove merrily around the country roads. The drivers pointed with their whips to Bodenstone. The fellow cheered. They passed the farmhouse of the Julie farmer. Cheer after cheer after cheer. Through Clane they drove, cheering and cheered. The peasant women stood at the half doors. The man stood here and there. The lovely smell there was in a wintry air. The smell of the Clane, rain and wintry air and turf, smouldering and corduroy. The train was full of the fellow, a long, long chocolate train with cream facing. The guards went to and fro, opening, closing, locking, unlocking the doors. They were a man in a dark blue and silver. They had silver whistles, and their keys made a quick music. Click, click, click. This video is made for a Navi Darius page.